All right, Nuggets fans, welcome in to Pickaxe and Roll, brought to you by our good friends over at BetOnline, number 38. I am your host, Ryan Blackburn at NBA Blackburn on Twitter, part of the Mile High Sports Podcast Network, and I'm excited to be here in the studio. I promised it. I said I was going to make it happen, and I am very fortunate to be getting some help in making it happen with my good friend, Danny Bailey, behind the mic. He is very great. We've done this before a couple times, and it's always easy to work with my guy Danny. Has been very easy in this particular process. I showed up a little bit late because traffic was bad. We're gonna figure it out, but very happy to be here and very excited to get going on this episode, this Tuesday episode of Pickaxe and Roll. Like I mentioned prior to, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday is when you will see Pickaxe and Roll going live at 10 a.m. We'll try to mix in some studio episodes for sure, and I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to be a lot of fun. On this episode, we're doing threats in the West to the Denver Nuggets, and I think it's important to go through it in this way because there's a lot of teams that could potentially win a title. I'm not sure as many of them are in the West this year as were last year. The LA Clippers were one of the teams that was at the top last year. They now have lost Paul George. He goes east. There's been a couple of other shifts in talent, including Karl Anthony Towns going to the east. How does that affect the Western Conference, you say? Well, we will get into it all and how it affects the Nuggets in just a little bit. Real quick, before we get going, though, this podcast, as you know, is brought to you by BetOnline, the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. Make sure to get in on the live odds and spreads to bet during the games because BetOnline has every stat and every matchup that you could possibly want. Think you know your stuff? Get in on the $200,000 mega contest and pick 5 games against the spread every single week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share of the $200K. When the game's over, head on over to their online casino as well. Head on over to the website today to get in on the action. BetOnline, the game starts here. Once again, I'm your host, Ryan Blackburn. Make sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button if you are new here. Let's get into it. I wanted to start with a tier list, and this is going to be one of those things where you're going to see me disappear here in just a little bit, but let's get into a tier list for the Western Conference. Danny, we good on the camera? Okay, that's what it is. The graphic is now up. Western Conference, biggest threats in the Western Conference. These are the 3 categories that I think I have at this current moment in time, talking about the Oklahoma City Thunder, the Minnesota Timberwolves, especially at the top. I might pick OKC and Minnesota against the Nuggets. I honestly might. And the reason for that is because I just think that they are in the same tier, if not slightly better than Denver at this current stage. The Nuggets, of course, lose Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. You have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander leading the OKC Thunder, who have so much talent, and they added Alex Caruso and Isaiah Hartenstein to that mix of talent while getting rid of Josh Giddey, who, if you look at the analytics like I do, they are a team that removed one of their weak links, removed some of their weaknesses, and has instead pushed forward their strengths. They're now better. They are a better perimeter defensive team and a better interior defensive team than they were before. And it's fascinating, I think, to see this breakdown. I think OKC is going to win 60 games this year. They were very close last year. If everything goes according to plan for them, and if everybody stays healthy, like Jalen Williams, Chet Holmgren, those guys were sophomore and rookie respectively last year, and they were still so good. I expect a jump from those guys. Those are high profile players, and within the roles that they have, it should be relatively easy for them to get better. In addition, Isaiah Hartenstein is one of those guys that has not necessarily given Jokic trouble before, but he's a part of the equation, right? He's a part of the equation for a team that needs athleticism, that needs physicality, and needs a 7-footer to match up with Nikola Jokic. And then you have Chet Holmgren, who you know who the what Minnesota ran with Rudy Gobert as their backline defender, Karl Anthony Towns defending. That was one of those things that really worked against the Nuggets. And if Aaron Gordon is going to be on the floor, I think you use Chet Holmgren to guard him if you're OKC and have him roam off of Aaron Gordon as much as possible, make life as hard for Nikola Jokic as you possibly can. That's a lot of size. That's a lot of length. That's a lot of athleticism and shot blocking capability right in Nikola Jokic's grill. So that's one of those matchups that I'm definitely worried about. And on top of that, like OKC's just got elite perimeter defense. They add Alex Caruso, but they already have Lou Dort. They have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who led the league in steals last year. And Jalen Williams is a strong defender himself. Oh, and by the way, off the bench, Cason Wallace is one of those young guys. Aaron Wiggins, another young guy. They have elite perimeter defense. And we saw how that affected Jamal Murray last year. So that is the biggest threat in the West to the Denver Nuggets, in my opinion. It is not the Minnesota Timberwolves. It is the Oklahoma City Thunder. And Nuggets fans are going to have a hard time processing that until it actually happens and until you see those matchups. Last year, OKC went 3-1 against the Nuggets. It wouldn't surprise me if it felt pretty similar this time around. Minnesota, obviously, they are still in that threat race, and it, I think, is a very important factor. Like Julius Randle is not necessarily as impactful as Karl Anthony Towns, but Dante DiVincenzo and adding him to the mix, I think, is a big deal. It's a bigger deal than people want to give it credit for. Nickeil Alexander-Walker wasn't great for Minnesota last year, and there were plenty of moments in that Western Conference semifinals against the Nuggets where Jamal Murray started figuring out Nickeil Alexander-Walker specifically. He didn't figure out Jaden McDaniels. He didn't figure out Anthony Edwards that much, but he did figure out Alexander Walker, excuse me. So I think that there is something to be said about Minnesota still having depth around what those guys are doing, around Julius Randle, around Rudy Gobert, and certainly around Anthony Edwards. There's a lot of different combinations that they can still throw out there. Still got Mike Conley, of course, still got a variety of other pieces that they can add. And one of the reasons why you might think a little bit less of them is adding Julius Randle, but also adding Rob Dillingham, who is a rookie. They drafted him 8th overall after trading a future first-round pick to the San Antonio Spurs. I don't think that Dillingham's going to be a factor in the playoffs, but would it be a surprise if Dante DiVincenzo just kind of slid into that spot and then Minnesota plays big while Anthony Edwards handles the ball? That wouldn't surprise me at all. And like DiVincenzo is proven in a playoff environment. So this is going to be a team that Denver still has to struggle with. And the other factor, of course, is that Naz Reid, who was the 6th man of the year last year, can obviously elevate his role a little bit more if Julius Randle struggles. We don't know for a fact that Julius Randle's going to struggle. I think he would struggle against the Nuggets specifically. Naz Reid was still very good. So they have weapons, they have options. And on top of it all, Denver still didn't have a great answer for Anthony Edwards. Now, Christian Brown getting into that starting lineup might be a big deal. We'll see what happens. And I'll talk about that in the second segment, how Denver can combat the Minnesota Timberwolves specifically. Next, let's go to the rest of that graphic. I'll go a little bit more rapid fire through some of these teams. Dallas and Phoenix are in the category. I picked Denver, but they're a threat. And you might be surprised to not see some of these other teams, but I just don't see a lot of competition for the Western Conference, especially when Denver gets into a playoff environment and you have to match up with Nikola Jokic. The only teams that I could really justify seeing it are Dallas, who has certainly 2 top 20 players with Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving, but also 2 top 20 players in Phoenix with Kevin Durant and Devin Booker. We've seen what those look like and what that matchup looks like with Denver. One of the things that the Nuggets had previously was they had consistent two-way ability with KCP and Bruce Brown. Now in that matchup against both teams, you're going to have to kind of pick and choose a little bit more. I'm a little bit worried about Christian Brown having to fill both of those roles at the same time. I'm also a little bit worried about Peyton Watson doing the same thing, though I think that those series are very important for a player like Peyton Watson. He's going to have to be impactful because there are very few players that the Nuggets have that can actually defend guys like Luca or Kevin Durant or Bradley Beal, etc. It would be ludicrous to think anything else. But Peyton Watson is one guy that I think could. You just need him to be able to shoot or contribute on the offensive end. The Nuggets didn't trust it last year, which is why he didn't play against the Minnesota Timberwolves. So I'm thinking if I'm the Nuggets, we got to outscore these teams in a lot of ways. And there are ways that they can do that. Obviously, Jokic being at the center of it all, but you have to have a specific plan against those groups. And Jamal Murray has to be really good against both teams. Think about Dallas and who they lost, Derrick Jones Jr. this last year. He would have been the guy to guard Jamal Murray. Now they've got guys like Najee Marshall and PJ Washington, who it feels like they're going to have PJ Washington guard everybody in their starting lineup because they've got Luca, Kyrie, and Klay Thompson out there. That is a tough burden for PJ Washington specifically. But they're still so young, and Phoenix still doesn't have a lot of depth behind Yusuf Nurkic at center. We've seen how he can match up with Jokic before. He can do a reasonable job as long as he doesn't get into foul trouble. He just gets into foul trouble most of the time. So I would pick Denver in each of these series, but they're a little bit more threatening to me than some of these other matchups on the list, which are Memphis, the Lakers, the Pelicans, and the Kings. I don't have the Clippers listed here because I just don't trust that they're actually going to get there. And there are some other teams that I would also be a little bit worried about, like not worried, but Houston, I don't think is ready for that. They might be able to compete with Denver a little bit more with their relentless energy and depth and things like that. But I just don't think that they're going to be able to survive again in the West this year. They still have to pick a lane. Memphis, the Lakers, the Pelicans, the Kings. I don't see it, but others might. This is the category where you're going to get some hot heads. You're going to get some general national analysts that are going to be very high on some of these teams, depending on the situation. Uh, the Kings, with the trade for DeMar DeRozan, that makes sense. The Pelicans traded for DeJounte Murray. That makes sense. The Lakers, obviously, that's the Lakers. And the Grizzlies, you add Zach Edey, you get a little bit healthier. John Morant comes back. I can at least understand why people would be a little bit more interested in that particular matchup. So we will see what happens with that. Non-NBA channel asks, Ryan, if there was a realistic player we could trade for to make us a favorite in an OKC series, who would it be? That is a great question. You know what? I'm actually going to lead off with that on the other side. When we come back, we are going to chat about matching up with each of these teams and how the Nuggets can defeat each of these teams, including the Oklahoma City Thunder and Minnesota Timberwolves. We will be right back on Mile High Sports. And we're back. Pickaxe and Roll. Ryan Blackburn here. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Really appreciate all the love and support on the podcast. As always, folks, make sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. I hope you like the studio look. It's a little bit different. And I'm going to get up some, I showed you guys in the podcast yesterday. I'm going to get up some Mile High Sports posters on my wall. The problem is the glare on the glass. I need to figure that out, but we will see what happens. So let's go back to this. Non-NBA channel says, Ryan, if there was a realistic player we could trade for to make us favorites in an OKC series, who would it be? That is a good kind of stepping off point for how the Nuggets can beat each of the top West contenders. I laid out in the first segment why I think each of these teams are dangerous or maybe not that dangerous or kind of dangerous, whatever it is. OKC, obviously, I think that Denver can beat them as currently constructed. I do. The difference between Chet and Isaiah Hartenstein and Jalen Williams from Arkansas, the big Jalen Williams, is that they're a little bit more undersized and a little bit skinnier than the Gobert, Towns, Naz Reid trio. Jokic had to work so hard in that Minnesota series, and that made it pretty difficult. I think they can win it as currently constructed. There's no doubt about that in my mind. Now, the problem, of course, that you run into is that OKC is going to be collapsing on him in the paint. They are going to be forcing Denver to take jumpers. They are going to be trying to force the ball out of Jamal Murray's hands. The Nuggets need a wing, a versatile wing of sorts that can actually be a threat and not be a liability on both ends of the floor. I don't know who that player is yet. I've thought about it. There's a couple of different options that you could go with. The upgraded version of Justin Holiday makes sense to me, or maybe the developed version of Julian Strawther makes sense for me. It's very possible that the Nuggets are close on that regard, and we just need to see what happens with a guy like Christian Brown, with a guy like Julian Strawther, with a guy like Peyton Watson. It's why the development of those players matters so much. Those guys are essential in this particular race where I might have just named the sixth and seventh, like the fifth, sixth, and seventh man in the Nuggets rotation. Russell Westbrook will be very interesting in that regard. How he faces his old team in a playoff series would be very fascinating. I'm curious to see how that breaks down. I kind of think he would go on tilt. I kind of think he would, especially against guys like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, guys like, I don't know, if he's being guarded by Aaron Wiggins, for example. He thinks he's better than that matchup. There's no question in my mind. There's certain things that he's going to be trying to do. He's going to try to hold on to. I don't know if that's the best case scenario for the Nuggets, and I think that it might not be the worst idea in the world for them to have another wing that they trust. And it has to be a wing because the Nuggets in that series will likely have to play small. I think that they move Michael Porter to the 4. I think that for large portions of that series, Aaron Gordon comes off the floor. And that is a scary thing for a lot of people where Aaron Gordon's part of your top 4. But there are just a couple of matchups, OKC and Minnesota, where it's just really difficult for Aaron to be this massively impactful piece because of the way those guys defend him. There was one game, certainly, that Aaron was fantastic. I think it was game 4 of the Minnesota series where he was absolutely dominant. He was making every shot. It turned into Kobe Bryant. That's what Rudy Gobert said. And then it never really happened again. So that's one thing where Denver's going to have to move Michael Porter to the 4 to space things out. They might insert somebody like Peyton Watson. They might move Christian Brown to the 3, and then they'll probably have to get something else. That would be my recommendation, but it's going to be a wing. It's going to be a two-way ball handler, somebody that can actually relieve some of the pressure from Jamal Murray a little bit, somebody that can shoot a little bit, somebody that can defend a little bit. You need a jack of all trades. You don't necessarily need somebody who's elite in each of those categories. But honestly, this kind of goes for Minnesota as well. If I was to say like who you need in order to defeat them in that series, you need somebody that is a two-way ball handler that when Minnesota decides to go small, and I think they will, with taking Julius Randle off the floor, inserting somebody like Dante DiVincenzo, and then you've got Anthony Edwards at the 3. Denver's going to need to match that. I don't think that they can play their traditional lineups. So we're going to find out. It's going to be very fascinating. Okay, so that is Minnesota and Oklahoma City. With Minnesota, I think Murray especially just has to get going and Porter can't disappear again. Christian Brown has got to guard Anthony Edwards. There's no question about that. He was the main guy to guard Anthony Edwards last year, but I think that both of those formulas are reasonably similar. You've got a guy like Gilgeous-Alexander or Anthony Edwards as your primary ball handler. They are both dynamic in different ways. You might need a different guy to defend each of them, but I think that that's going to be very scary for a lot of people and for Nuggets fans to have to deal with. So, going to be fascinating because Jamal he's going to be overwhelmed at some points in the playoffs because everybody would be overwhelmed. It's one of the reasons why uh, OKC has Jalen Williams, why they have uh, Alex Caruso now, guys like that that can relieve some of the pressure from SGA. It's why Luka Doncic and the Mavericks, they got Kyrie Irving. Like there's a reason why these teams have multiple ball handlers. The Nuggets don't have that luxury because their assets and their money are tied up in other categories that make them great in a different way. But this is one of the weaknesses of that roster building strategy, and the Nuggets have to overcome it in some way, shape, or form. As for Dallas one is interesting, and I think we could probably put Phoenix into that category as well, like I did. Jokic is going to have to overwhelm Derek Lively and Daniel Gafford. That's the first line of defense. It's one of the things that Dallas is counting on when they decide to go with this. They're going to have PJ Washington at the 4, Klay Thompson at the 3, Kyrie Irving at the 2, Luka at the 1, and one of those bigs at the 5. They are not going to play both of them, I don't think. I would be surprised if they did. Now, they might remove Klay and they might add another point of attack defender like a Najee Marshall. I saw that Dante Exum got hurt. Maybe they decide to go with another point of attack defender throughout the season, but they're going to need somebody to guard Jamal Murray. And I don't think it's PJ Washington. If it's PJ Washington, then he's got too many responsibilities, because the one thing that we've heard, and I've heard other national analysts talk about it with Dallas, PJ Washington could be guarding Jokic, and they decide to have Derek Lively or Daniel Gafford on Aaron Gordon and do the same thing that Minnesota and OKC were doing. Hard to do that when you're guarding freaking Jamal Murray. So it's going to be a difficult thing for Dallas to sort of manage. They don't have enough defenders to really match up with Denver. Now, what they do have is elite offense. They have an offensive formula that makes a lot of sense. And Luka with a above the rim runner is going to be impossible for the Nuggets to stop. They're going to have to really overcommit to that, and it's going to allow guys like Kyrie Irving, Klay Thompson, and PJ Washington especially to really take advantage of that from shooting threes. If they shoot threes well, then it's going to be very interesting to see if Denver can match up with that. The Nuggets are going to need to score 1.3 points per possession, which is really, really high, in order to keep up with it. And then off the bench, Denver's probably going to need to stagger Murray a little bit. They're going to have to stagger Porter. How Russell Westbrook plays against Dallas will be very interesting. Last year, he went 13 of 50 from the field against Dallas in 5 games. After game 1, where he looked functional, games 2 through 5, he completely malfunctioned. And that's something that people are not going to want to hear, but it is what happened. And I have to imagine that Dallas is looking at that thinking, gee, why don't we just try to recreate what happened last year? And Denver may not have enough resources to really change that. So you're probably playing Jamal Murray a little bit more with the second unit, which is fine. That's what he usually does in the playoffs. But you're going to need to play Michael Porter. Somebody like Julian Strawther or Peyton Watson is going to have to really show up. And then Dario Saric going to have to space the floor for this particular matchup. I don't know how it's going to work overall, but I do think that the Nuggets are going to be impacted if Russell Westbrook really struggles in that series. Same thing with Phoenix, by the way. Now, they don't have necessarily the same personnel to really do that, but they'll probably guard Russell Westbrook with Bradley Beal or Devin Booker or Tyus Jones or Monte Morris or somebody of that nature. If Russell Westbrook could take advantage of that, that would be great. If he can't, then that could be a little bit difficult. And I'm curious to see which direction that goes for sure. As for those last few teams, we've got Memphis, we've got New Orleans, we've got the Lakers, we've got Sacramento. Those are the four that you're looking at and saying, all right, yes, they could beat Denver in somebody's world. I don't think that they're really that serious to beat Denver. Memphis is probably the most serious, where we've seen what their defense looks like at their peak. That was with Steven Adams there, though, and now it's Zach Edey, who is a rookie. Now, the reports out of Memphis have been insane about Zach Edey. Like he's the next coming of Moses Malone or Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I don't know if that's what's ultimately going to happen, but he did dominate college in a way where we haven't ever really seen since those top tier centers of the past. So is it possible that he just translates that to the NBA? He was drafted pretty high in this last draft for that reason. So maybe that happens. Maybe he's great. Maybe they can play Edie guarding Jokic and then Jaren Jackson Jr. roaming off of Aaron Gordon and providing that backline rim protection. I think against a lot of teams, they'll be able to get away with that. Against Jokic, he's got to take advantage of that Zach Edey matchup, whether Edey is too slow or inexperienced or not necessarily as ready as he will be in future years. Maybe that matchup is great in against the Nuggets going forward, but it cannot be great in this first year. So they also don't have a whole bunch of tall wings. Yes, they've got John Morant, Desmond Bain, Jaren Jackson, or not Jaren Jackson. They've got Marcus Smart on the perimeter. They've got guys like Vince Williams and Gigi Jackson who are young on their wings right now. Both of them are hurt at the moment, but they'll probably be healthy for the playoffs. Guys like Michael Porter have to be better. Like they have to be really good in that series, taking advantage of the open jumpers, taking advantage of overwhelming some younger guys. He can do that, but he's got to really take charge in a matchup like that because like Jamal's going to have to deal with Ja. He's going to have to deal with Marcus Smart. He's going to have to deal with Desmond Bain. Be a little bit different. New Orleans, right now, their centers are Daniel Tice, Jeremiah Robinson Earl, and Yves Misi, who is a rookie. Until that changes, I think that Denver just has New Orleans' number. That's a full stop kind of thing. If they change and Brandon Ingram gets traded and they start guys like Trey Murphy or Herb Jones at that spot, Zion Williamson plays the 4 and then somebody else plays the 5, then great. I've been waiting for the Brandon Ingram for Jared Allen trade. Like, I don't know if that's actually going to happen. I heard that it was a talk that New Orleans has been targeting him. I also heard that they were targeting Wendell Carter, and Wendell Carter Jr., he just was re-signed or like extended by the Orlando Magic. They're not giving him up. So you got to figure out something. If you're New Orleans, maybe their rookie is really good in the long run. In the short run, it's just going to be hard to match up with the best player in the world. And then Murray, I think, can get going. Even though Herb Jones might be guarding him for a lot of that time, they'll force some switches. They'll force DeJounte Murray or CJ McCollum or Brandon Ingram to guard him. I think Murray can get going in that series as well. And that's actually one where Michael Porter will excel because New Orleans is going to have to double. They're going to have to rotate. And Michael Porter should be great at taking advantage of those rotations pretty consistently from a shot-making standpoint. The Lakers are the Lakers. I don't feel like talking about them because, like, why would I? Full stop. Why would I talk about them right now? They are whatever. The Nuggets have their number. Nothing has changed. Sacramento, Aaron Gordon guards DeMar DeRozan. That's a matchup that the Nuggets have gone to pretty consistently against Chicago. Now you've got Aaron Gordon guarding DeMar DeRozan in Sacramento. Christian Brown will guard De'Aaron Fox, but that could also be a Peyton Watson matchup where you rotate him in, and I could see that working pretty well. Jamal Murray has to cook because he'll be matched up with De'Aaron Fox or Malik Monk. If he's guarded by Keegan Murray, then he definitely has to cook that matchup. And then Jokic can probably foul out Sabonis, much in the same way that he would have to foul out Yusuf Nurkic, but he can do that. I will say this matchup, I might have underrated it just a little bit. I've always considered Sacramento kind of the B version of what the Nuggets are, because the Fox Sabonis two-man game is very similar to the Jokic Murray two-man game and the way that they built their teams, the way that they run their rosters. It's always been the B version. But if the Nuggets got worse, hypothetically, and Sacramento got better, hypothetically, then maybe that's a little bit closer than I give it credit for. So I do think Sabonis will give Jokic some numbers. Like, it will probably be Jokic having 30, 13, and 8, and it'll be Sabonis having 25, 14, and 6. So it's not quite canceling each other out, but it's pretty close. So it'll be interesting to see how that affects the rest of the matchups. Okay, folks, I think that is going to do it for this particular episode of 20Q of Pickaxe and Roll. This is the 12th 20Q episode that I've done so far this offseason. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get to all 20. Maybe I could still do some of them going into the season. That kind of seems a little bit weird because these are supposed to be preview episodes, but I do really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed the content from the studio. Let us know what you think. Let us know if there's anything that we can improve upon. Would love to know so we could iron it out and get it as good as possible for everybody here. It was nice to be able to be in studio as opposed to in the room. So we'll make sure to try to get here as often as I can. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you to BetOnline for sponsoring this video. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button on the way out. We'll talk to you guys on Thursday.